Hey Fish Fam, this is Nikachu, Merfolk Master, and today I'd like to go over my decklist and sideboard guide for Simic Merfolk. So for all you patrons out there, you get early access to this content, and then it will be available to everybody else about a week later. And this Simic Merfolk deck is the deck list that I took to Grand Prix Minneapolis, and while I'd had a mediocre 4-3 at Grand Prix Minneapolis in the main event, I went 12-2 in the side events, earning me 4 boxes, 3 boxes of Dominaria and 1 box of War of the Spark. And in addition to this, I played this list in my local 5K, which got me the top 8, and we split it. And I earned 560 Canadian dollars from that. So overall, I earned about 900 US dollars with this deck list. So I'm very happy. Not only that, I also have won a ton online with it, including a 5-0 that got published. So I'm very happy and confident with this deck list, and I'd like to go over why I am running the build that I am, and I can also go over what I think are the flex spots that you could take advantage of if there are some certain tweaks that you would like to make to your own deck, to your own personal preference. So why Simic? Why Simic over Mono Blue? And the core reason is because I think Modern is just way too fast right now. I think there are too many decks with free wins that are trying to kill by turn 3 and turn 4. And I think you can distract them or race them with a Simic Merfolk build. Command a Speaker on turn 1, followed by Lords on every other turn, is a really good way of winning the game or really ensuring a victory. It will put an enormous amount of pressure on your opponents. So either you kill them or they try to deal with your creatures first, and that will slow down their own win condition. And you can still have a lot of turn 4 kills with Benthic Biomancer, assuming they really don't do anything to your creatures. Other advantages, like I think this list is particularly well positioned against almost everything except Burn and Mono Red Prowess. I mean, you'll have game against those things, or Mono Red Phoenix. You'll have game against all those decks, but I can't say that I have any advantage against them compared to a Mono Blue build, especially since we're going to be hurting our life total with Waterlog Grove and Breeding Pool. There's going to be a lot of situations where you don't have a choice. You're going to have to take 2 damage or just fall behind on tempo. So, but I find that the list is very clean, very smooth, very consistent, and very powerful. I actually think that this list is of the power level and consistency that I received since the Treasure Cruise era. And you may not have been there at the time, but there was a point where Merfolk was winning at about 80% of the time. I had an 80% win rate, and I'm actually very close to that right now, hanging around 78% with this particular build over all the games that I've played so far. So it feels very, very strong. And anything else I'd like to say? Well, the Lords are very good against Hogak, and I know Hogak's probably going to get banned, or maybe by the time you see this, Hogak is already banned. But going into Grand Prix Vegas, you're definitely going to see Hogak. You have no choice. It's going to be there, and if you want to win the tournament, you have to beat Hogak. And cards like Kamena Speaker, immediately followed up by a Lord, can start blocking Bloodghast and Grave Crawlers. And if you get enough Lords in play, like even 2 Lords in play, then the Lords can start blocking the Bloodghast and the Grave Crawlers. And it's very easy to counterattack against Hogak. Hogak takes a lot of damage really quickly out of the game. They have to fetch and shock themselves almost always. So they start the game at 14 life, and it doesn't take very many Lords to do some blocking, and then you swing back for victory. So, and not to mention, a lot of the creatures cannot block. So, anything else I'd like to say about this? Yeah, we've got the 8 mana. We have 8 1-drops, which increase the chances of a turn 4 kill. I wasn't super high on Benthic Biomancer, but I think Benthic Biomancer is better than Silvergill Adept. As you see, there's no Silvergill Adept in this deck, because Silvergill Adept doesn't contribute to any turn 4 kills. And I realized that if I play Silvergill Adept on turn 2 against like Urza Whir Prison or Thopter Sword of the Meek combo, If I played Silver Gill Adept on turn 2 versus humans, if I played it on turn 2 versus what's another racing sort of archetype? A Hogak. Hogak is obviously Hogak, Dredge. These sort of matchups where if you are in a matchup where you're racing the other opponent, you have Boggles, Infect. Those are also really good examples. You lose. If you play Silver Gill Adept on turn 2, you're basically super far behind. And Silver Gill Adept only proved to be very effective for me if I had an Ether Vial out. But in the games I don't have Ether Vial, Silver Gill Adept is a huge liability. So why have Silver Gill Adept when I could have Benthic Biomancer, which is a 1-drop that can contribute to turn 4 kills or put pressure on my opponent really quickly. And it can loot. It's not actual card advantage, but it's still card selection. And I think it was worth more of a slot than Silver Gill Adept, and that's why I've been dumping Silver Gill Adept from my list, because the modern metagame is so quick, so fast, and you might lose some percent. You might be losing some percentage points against Jund, like just maybe, because Renin 6 can kill it off anyway. So you pay 2 mana, you get a card, but then Renin 6 comes out, snipes it down for 1 damage. Not to mention, Silver Gill Adept is still weak to Lava Dart, Gut Shot, and Plague Engineer. So anyway, with all those disadvantages in mind, I'm sort of done with Silver Gill Adept, and we're going to welcome Benthic Biomancer, who also has 1 toughness, but you have the ability to adapt it and get out of range of the 1 damage spells. So 8 1-drops, very clear, powerful, a good way to start your games off. We've got 14 lords, and probably at least 12 are necessary, but I did want the extra power with Mare Regery, and some interactive spells with Harbinger of the Tides and Tidebinder Mage. Tidebinder Mage, just an ode to the burn decks, to Mono Red Prowess, Mono Red Phoenix, and also helps against Hogak. It taps down all the important stuff like Vengevine and, more importantly, Hogak itself. So Tidebinder Mage has that part to play there as well. And also against Izzet Phoenix, you can tap down a Arclight Phoenix if you have an opportunity to do that. And then randomly, it's also good against Jund. Humans, tapping down Noble Hierarch and Mantis Rider. Those are all relevant creatures to tap down. 4 Force Negation, basically a staple right now. So Spreading Seas are divided between the main and the sideboard because it's like on the draw, it's not good against Burn. It's useless against Mono Red Prowess or Mono Red Phoenix. I think you're really wasting your time playing a Spreading Seas, unless they're on a 1-lander, which in that case you're lucky. Spreading Seas, useless, not particularly useful against Blue Eye Control, which is also out there. Not that useful against Hogak. I mean, you can bring it in, but a lot of the creatures can't block anyway. So, or we're interacting with them, tapping them down. So I don't find it that mandatory to have Spreading Seas in the main. So many Spreading Seas in the main deck. So I've broken it up between the main and the sideboard. There are enough prominent decks that Spreading Seas is not useful against. So we've split them up between the main and the side. Not to mention, the deck is really aggressive. I mean, once the creatures get big enough between Command Speaker and just Lord after Lord after Lord after Lord, you may not even need the creatures to be unblockable anyway. So one thing about the sideboard is I'm playing with as many I win cards as possible, so Chalice of the Void is one of them. If you can resolve this against Mono Red Phoenix, Mono Red Prowess, or Izzet Phoenix, Infect, Boggles on the play, then the game's over. The game's over. You win. You basically win the game. I mean, they would have to get really lucky they would have to have an answer to Chalice of the Void or get really lucky in order to come back from a Chalice on 1. Chalice of the Void is just an incredibly powerful card in those matchups. Not to mention, you're going to see through the sideboard guide, you can bring in Chalice against a lot of other decks like Tron, Urza, even Control, Blue-White Control, you can bring this in against. I found quite a bit of success with Chalice of the Void against Blue-White Control. So, but there is a giant chunk of decks where you just play the Chalice on 1 and the game's basically over. They can't win from there. So, Grafdigger's Cage. I don't have enough experience with Surgical Extraction to find out if Surgical is better, but I'm going to just play with the Cage. It is another I win card against a lot of archetypes. For example, if you play Grafdigger's Cage against Neoform, they basically lose on the spot unless they can answer it. If got 2 Grafdigger's Cages out. They just lose. They're not going to be able to beat both of them. Not to mention Grafdigger's Cage. It will beat Hogak, assuming it's not interacted with. That's a tall order to ask for, because they are bringing in a lot of interaction in the form of Assassin's Trophy and Force of Vigor. So they know you're gonna bring in something, so they're prepared for Grafdigger's Cage. But still, if it's not interacted with, you win the game. So that'll happen about 20%. I estimate it happens about 20% of the time, and the other 40% of the other 80% of the time, they're gonna answer it in some way. Which is not necessarily bad either, because you're spending 1 mana to do this, and things like Assassin's Trophy cost card, like it's massive card disadvantage and tempo. They have to spend 2 mana to destroy the Grafdigger's Cage and give you a land, and that could have been a turn that they play another Satyr Wayfinder, or I don't know, Flashback Faithless Looting, something like that. So it's a mana intensive answer that I think also benefits us as well. And there's random other decks that Grafdigger's Cage can be sided in against. Then there's Collector Oof, which I think it's another I win card. You play this against Urza Whir, and basically wins. You play this against Affinity, you win. Play this against Hardened Scales Affinity, you win. You play this against Tron. Surprisingly, pretty often when you play this against Tron, you win. There's just a lot of artifact decks that will just get completely shut down by Collector Oof. I was super hyper impressed with the card, and as you see, against opposing Vial decks, we can bring this in on the play, and if they have an Aether Vial, you play this and it really slows them down, puts their game to a standstill. So Collector Oof is basically also another one of the main reasons to go blue-green, go Simic, because you get access to Collector Oof, which I think is a superior answer to artifacts than, say, Ceremonious Rejection. Not to mention, like, it shuts off the most important hosers against Merfolk. We're talking like Walking Ballista, we're talking Engineered Explosives, and those are cards that you see out of Tron, Eldrazi Tron, Amulet Titan, and so all those fringe matchups, or even those big matchups like Tron, you're definitely going to see Tron get obliterated by this Collector Oof. So Collector Oof just says, it's another thing. These cards will win the game unless they're answered. So it's a very powerful sideboard package that we have here. And in the end, we've got 2 Spreading Seas to round out the deck. Because there are matchups where you're going to want to bring in the Spreading Seas, like Mardu Pyromancer or Jund. Tron, you'll want to bring it in against Tron. And we have 1 more sideboard slot left, so I've got a Random Deprive, which will help you against Scapeshift or any combo or control matchup. So let's talk about some flex cards. I think the most flexible slots are the 2 Harbinger of the Tides, the 2 Tidebinder Mage, and the 2 Mare Regery. I had a local 5K event where I actually did replace the Tidebinder Mages with 2 Echoing Truths, because there was a particular Urza Whir Prison player that I needed to beat, and I didn't think Tidebinder Mage was over. Like, my metagame is like heavy on Tron, Death and Taxes, Blue-White Control, Black-Green X, so like, you know, it could help, but I wasn't sure how important that would be in this particular metagame. Dredge is very popular, and yeah, that's basically it. And it's a decent chunk of burn. But I felt like I could dump this thing for the Echoing Truths, because I was almost certain that this particular Urza Whir player, I would end up having to face them. So so I want some answer to Ensnaring Bridge. So I think the Regiris, the Harbingers, or the Tidebinder Mages, they could be, like, for example, you could play with 4 Tidebinder Mages, or maybe you could play with Echoing Truth over one of these cards, or I'm not sure what particular cards you want to play with, but those are some flex spots. And I even toyed with the idea of maybe removing even maybe 1 Benthic Biomancer in the Deprive for like 2 Echoing Truths. Just put 1 in the main, 1 in the sideboard. I always feel like slightly naked if I don't have the Echoing Truth, but truth be told, there's not enough Ensnaring Bridges in the format for me to care. Like, the Tron decks are now dumping Karn the Great Creator, so in favor of more Wormcoil engines, which is more effective against Hogak and a variety of other matchups, like Burn and Mono Red Prowess, Mono Red Phoenix. So less Karn the Great Creators, therefore less ensnaring bridges, therefore less worry about those things. And my win rate was super ultra high, so maybe it's because I've got those extra interactive creatures in the deck over things like Echoing Truth. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I think these are flexible changes if you so wanted to make them. And now with that comprehensive deck tech, let's move into the sideboard guide. So let's start off with Izzet Phoenix. Izzet Phoenix is not the hottest deck at the moment, but a lot of people have bought into it over the year, so you're definitely going to still see it a lot. I'm bringing in 4 Chalice of the Void. You're going to want to put on 1. Just nails a lot of the cantrips. They can't keep refueling their deck. I mean, maybe they're able to flip a thing in the ice, but that's going to be about it, and they won't have any follow-up past that. Bring in a Deprive, because they have enough high-impact spells like... is it Finality of Promise? I can't remember. The red card that gives cards flashback. You want to counter things like Aria of Flame. Maybe you even want to counter a thing in the ice. I think that's an appropriate thing to counter as well. The things you're going to take out are the Spreading Seasons and the Benthic Biomancers. Benthic Biomancer is a lot more work to loot the card, and it's just not very big in general. But the main reason we're taking it out is because of the Chalice of the Void that we're going to put on 1. Not that I think we're taking out 1-drops in a lot of matchups where we're bringing in Chalice of the Void, though I don't think it's a huge liability to be taking out the Chalice of the Void. Sorry, taking out the 1-drops, because we're running 4 Cavern of Souls in the main deck, and we're taking out Spreading Seas because our opponent has a lot of islands and there's no chance of mana screwing them. So with Mono Red Phoenix, this is quite a bit of a different story, but it's the same. It's the same sideboarding plan. Bring in Chalice of the Void, put on 1. Their deck is just mostly composed of 1-drops. Bring in Deprive, just so you can counter a key spell that hits your face. Maybe you can hit a Bedlam Reveler, which is probably one of the better targets. That, I would say, one of the few ways I could lose this matchup once I have a Chalice of the Void on the board is a Bedlam Reveler hitting the battlefield, drawing a bunch of cards and maybe a bunch of Phoenixes, or helps find a Braid to beat our Chalice of the Void. We're going to take out Spreading Seas. I actually think it's very poor in this matchup on the play or the draw. The deck plays Manamorphose if they need to if they need to fix their mana. Deck plays for Faithless Looting to help fix their mana. Not to mention they can use the colorless mana to help cast the flashback on Faithless Looting. Spreading Seas is just not reliable, in my opinion. It will be... The problem is if you play it on turn 2, even on the play, and you don't actually mana screw them, you just gave up your second turn of the game, and they're a very mana efficient deck. And so let's say they play their 3rd land drop. Now they have 2 red sources, they play another creature, they play more spells, and you're just so far behind, you're never coming back from that. So I just don't rely on Spreading Seas in this matchup. I would say that if I was playing with Master of Waves, that I could keep some Spreading Seas in because it helps contribute to Devotion for Master of Waves. And we take out Benthic Biomancer because I don't want it getting hit by the Chalice on 1. So going on with humans on the play, we're going to be bringing in 2 Collector Oofs and 2 Spreading Seasons. And we're going to take out all the Force and Negations. When we're on the play, we're going to have less cards. There's going to be less reason to have Force Negation in the deck at all. The only thing basically you can hit is the Ether Vial and maybe a Dismember from them. But I wouldn't feel comfortable even Force Negationing an Ether Vial on the play. I would rather defeat their Ether Vials with Collector Oof. So here's the thing. We're in a lot of these in over this guide. And whenever I bring in Collector Oof, I usually take out Ether Vial, but I don't have enough cards to take out against humans to do that. Not to mention, especially on the play, I would like to keep my Ether Vial. So the plan is that if I have an Ether Vial and Collector Oof at the same time, and my opponent has Ether Vial, then it's going to be a judgment call for me whether I want to put this Oof on the board and shut both Ether Vials off, or just play out my hand first and then put the Oof into play later when I've mostly emptied my hand. Another thing is, if you have an Ether Vial, your opponent doesn't have an Ether Vial, well, don't play the Collector Oof. Just play it at the end of... Just play all your other creatures first, and at the very last thing that you play is the Collector Oof, just as a surprise blocker, Violet in or something. So, Collector Oof is situationally a hoser against humans. Like, one of the best ways that humans beats Merfolk is they're more mana efficient. They put 2 things in play on every single turn. We're only putting 1 thing in play. So by playing Collector Oof, when they have an Ether Vial, that keeps them at a pace of playing 1 spell per turn, so that we can compete with them. That's what I really like about it. And Spreading Seas, we bring in Spreading Seas. I think Spreading Seas is fine. Helps give us Island Walk to attack through our opponent, and we take out the Force Negations. Now on the draw, we don't want Collector Oof at all, because we really need the Ether Vial to work, so we are not bringing Collector Oof on the draw. Instead, we're just bringing in the 2 Spreading Seas, and I'm taking out 2 Force Negations, keeping in 2 Force Negations, so now there's actually a little bit more of a reason to Force Negation and Ether Vial, because we're on the draw, we're up a card, we get to play with 1 more card than our opponent. Our opponent starts with 7, but we're going to start the game with 8, because we start with 7 and then we draw a card to 8. So we have more room to pitch an extra card to play Force Negation. And I would like to Force Negation their Ether Vial on the play. I think that would be a worthwhile use of Force Negation versus humans. And then randomly they'll have Dismember or something that you could Force Negation somewhere down the line. Against Eldrazi-tron, we're going to bring in 4 Collector Oof. This shuts down Walking Ballista. It shuts down Expedition Map, which can find Blast Zone. It shuts down Mind Stone, which helps ramp into Karn the Great Creator, or Thought-Knot Seer, or Reality Smasher. So Collector Oof is a very, very good, powerful card in the Eldrazi-tron matchup. It's not as effective as the other matchups, because they do play with a decent chunk of removal, whether it's Reality Distortion? No. The colorless removal spell giving +3/-3 to a creature. They play with Dismember, so not perfect, but Collector Oof I think is very good in this matchup. Not to mention, if your opponent screws up and plays Mycosynth Lattice, Mycosynth Lattice turns all permanents in play into artifacts. And Collector Oof says activated abilities of artifacts can't be played, or can't be activated, so it effectively locks out the opponent, also locks out you, but if you have more creatures in play, then you win, because attacking isn't an activated ability, you can just attack every turn. You bring in the Spreading Seas, because you can Spreading Seas either one of their Tron lands, or the Blast Zone, which is going to be very important. It's going to enter as on 1, but then that's your opportunity to get it in there and Spreading Seas it before it gets to 2 and then blows everything up. So because we're bringing in Collector Oof, I side out 2 Ether Vials as a hedge from screwing ourselves over. I take out Tidebinder Mage because it's not important in this matchup, and I also take out 2 Benthic Biomancers, which is a fine card, but I have to cut something, and I would rather keep all the Lords and all the other heavy cards in the deck. Okay, now we get on to Burn, and I've actually changed my sideboard plan against Burn since I originally posted the sideboard guide, so if you're watching this, please update your Burn matchup. I'm bringing in a Deprive Spreading Seas on the play. Spreading Seas is very good on the play because on the draw, they'll have 1 mana, and then if we play Spreading Seas on our turn 2, then they're down to 0 mana, and on their turn 2, they'll have 1 mana again. And so long as they stay down to 1 mana, it's going to be hard to cast Boros Charm, Lightning Helix, what else? Boros Charm, Lightning Helix, Searing Blaze, Searing Blood, cards like that. That require double red. Now, Burn plays with a little bit more lands than they used to. That's okay. It's still a really effective card on the play. Slows them down a lot if they can only play 1-drops. They can't even get Eidolon out. We're going to bring in Deprive because it's just a counterspell. Chalice of the Void, you can put on 1 or you could put it on 2. 2 is the safer one because then that hits the most high impact cards. It also hit like Searing Blood, Searing Blaze, Lightning Helix. Those 3 are really big ones in the matchup, but also will hurt. It will also counter Smash to Smithereens, which is the card that destroys Chalice of the Void. So yeah, I think 2 is, and also the deck has mostly 2-drops. Now, if I don't have, if it's turn 2 of the game, I'm not going to save Chalice of the Void for turn 4. I'll just slam it on 1. but it is more effective on 2 if you ever rip it later. I'm going to take out Harbinger of the Tides on the play because I have the initiative. My opponent is less likely to have creatures tapped because I'm attacking and they're the ones on the defense. I'm taking out 3 Benthic Biomancers and 2 Mara Regery. Now, originally the sideboard guide took out all the Benthic Biomancers and a Kumena Speaker and no Regery because of Chalice on 1. I was trying to hedge on Chalice on 1, but I think the problem with that is I just don't have any board presence on the first turn of the game, and I want to have something. I would rather have a Kumena Speaker or a Benthic Biomancer that can eventually challenge a Goblin Guide that's on the battlefield, or even an Eidolon the Great Revel. Because, like, the way I've designed the deck right now, it seems as if I don't have anything to do. I just had a lot less things to do on turn 1, and I don't want to concede that much tempo to burn. And I don't think it's that bad to have 1-drops in the main deck, even with Chalice in the inside, because we can still violin creatures with 1 mana, and we can also play them through Cavern of Souls. Now on the draw, we're taking out Mara Regery because this was always like the typical clunky card in the matchup. You spend 3 mana, and they just destroy it for like 1 or 2. Now, on the draw, we're still bringing in Deprive, we still bring in Chalice of the Void. These are counter spells, but I'm taking out the Spreading Seas because you are so far. If you play Spreading Seas on the draw, you are so far behind. You can situationally play Spreading Seas if you can recognize your opponent is choked on mana because they missed land drops, but overall, I don't think it's worth it. It works only if you have multiples of Spreading Seas in hand, but it's really situational. I would just prefer to play with no Spreading Seas on the draw. And on the draw, we take out 1 Benthic Biomancer and 2 Mara Regery. So next we have Crixus Death Shadow. It's a matchup where you could use the Deprive, you can counter Gurmag Angler, Death Shadow, Anger the Gods. Not that Crixus Death Shadow is one of the more popular Death Shadow decks, but some people, they just still bring whatever they're comfortable with or what they've been playing for the last 2 years. Bring in Spreading Seas. Spreading Seas is not too bad against Crixus Death Shadow. They don't have that many colored mana sources. So if they have like Blood Crypt, Island, Swamp, hitting the Blood Crypt is a pretty big deal because now it cuts off the chances. Let's say if they had just an untapped Blood Crypt, you can Spreading Seas it to get the reaction out of your opponent. Are they going to tap it for float red or black mana? And be able to make safer attacks if they don't use that mana for Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt. And so you can cut them off. Spreading Seas can help cut off sources of mana and can also prevent spells that require double mana, like Liliana the Last Hope. Taking out Cavern of Souls and Aether Vial, it is an attrition-based deck, and against attrition-based decks, we have to shave some of our mana sources, like Aether Vial, and I took out 1 Benthic Biomancer. Just thought it was one of the weaker cards we could take out for the other cards. Against Mardu Death Shadow, I bring in 2 Spreading Seas and 4 Chalice of the Void. Oh, by the way, okay, I don't bring in Chalice of the Void against Crixus Death Shadow because I actually think after sideboarding, they have a lot less 1-drops and they're way heavier on the 2 and 3 mana spells. Like Kolaghan's Command, I know is not that big right now, but it's still in their deck. And the Planeswalkers, Liliana the Last Hope, sometimes Liliana the Veil, Anger the Gods. Basically, all the high-impact spells are now, like, they cost more than 1 mana. Things like Dismember, all those things just dodge Chalice on 1. But in Mardu Death Shadow, they're super heavy on 1-drops. Incredibly heavy on 1-drops, so I do want to bring in the 2 Spreading Seas. You can mana screw them really hard. They're a 3-color deck that doesn't play islands. I think Chalice of the Void is super powerful in this matchup. They are very heavy on 1-drops. They're trying to be very mana efficient. I think they get really shut down by Chalice of the Void. For these 6 cards we bring in, we're going to take out 2 Benthic Biomancer, 2 Tidebinder Mage, and 2 Aether Vial. So in this matchup, because we're bringing in the Chalice of the Void, it's still an attrition-based matchup, so you have to shave on mana sources, but I'm a little bit more willing to take out the Aether Vial instead of the lands, because we're bringing in Chalice of the Void, and once we put it on 1, Aether Vial is going to be a liability. Not all Mardu Death Shadow decks play Dreadhorde Arcanist, like the original decks did, but the future decks got rid of it. But just in case you see a Dreadhorde Arcanist, you can keep the Tidebinder Mage and maybe get rid of I'm not sure. Like maybe another 2 Benthic Biomancers, for example. Bant Spirits, no changes. The main deck is as good as it's going to get. There's no way you're going to improve it. Against Death and Taxes, you can bring in 2 Spreading Seas, take out 2 Force Negations. 2 Force Negations left on the deck will be fine against their Path to Exiles or Ether Vials if they run them. Against Hardened Scales Affinity, you're going to want to bring in the Collector Oofs. Just put on the battlefield that you win the game, basically. You bring in Deprive specifically to counter, either to protect your Collector Oof from Dismember or to counter Walking Ballista if there's no way of beating it. And also Spreading Seas to get Island Walk when there's a big board stall, and also to Spreading Seas Inkmoth Nexus. We're going to take out a Benthic Biomancer. I don't think it's... Got to make some cuts. Benthic Biomancer is not that impressive. Tidebinder Mage has nothing to tap down, and Harbinger of the Tides is very poor in this matchup because of... Do I have more things? Yeah. Harbinger of the Tides is very poor in the Hardened Scales Affinity matchup because there's a lot of things that get value when they enter the battlefield, so I don't think Harbinger is that good. Like, if you bounce Walking Ballista, it can come down even bigger and better than it was before. And because we're bringing in Collector Oof, we're going to take out 2 Ether Vial. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Classic Affinity. Collector Oof is still just as effective. Spreading Seas to get Island Walk and also deal with their Inkmoth, Blinkmoth Nexuses. Ether Vial, taken out again because of the Collector Oof. It works both ways. You screw over their artifacts, we screw over our own artifacts. Tidebinder Mage has no synergy against Affinity because they don't have green or red creatures. And we take out 2 Benthic Biomancers. Against Jund, Rock, and Abzan, the plan is all the same. We bring in the only playable cards, 2 Spreading Seas and a Deprive. Deprive can counter basically anything. You counter the right Planeswalker, counter the right creature, most importantly, if you can counter a sweeper, then that's what you should do. And because these are all attrition-based matchups, we're taking out 3 Ether Vial. These are the sort of matchups that I used to like to take out 1 Ether Vial, 1 land, but any one of them could bring in Collector Oof against us. There's some Merfolk decks that bring in Relic of Progenitus, so Collector Oof is like pretty good against... Well, it's like they're free rolling, hitting their opponent's Ether Vials and Relic of Progenituses if they bring in Collector Oof. They don't have that many copies that they would bring in, but still, I don't mind if a Collector Oof shuts down 1 Ether Vial, but I'll be pretty upset if it shuts down more than 1. Against Mardu Pyromancer, we're going to bring in, and I'm talking about the new versions of Mardu Pyromancer, we're going to bring in 2 Spreading Seas just to get Island Walk against a League of Tokens and Bedlam Revelers. Not to mention they can't use the blue mana at all because they're a Mardu deck. We're gonna bring in Chalice of the Void to play it on 1. And Chalice of the Void is pretty effective in this matchup, shutting down Lightning Bolt, Faithless Looting, Fatal Push, Inquisition of Kozilek, Thoughtseize. Feel like I'm missing some things, but the new versions of Mardu Pyromancer lean harder on Faithless Looting, like they need it. Like there's that new Lightning Helix card, I can't remember the card, but it's a 4-mana black spell, but if you can get it discarded, it turns into a sorcery speed Lightning Helix in the graveyard. So if they can't get that in the graveyard, then their whole deck is super ultra clunky. We're going to take out an Ether Vial and a Cavernous Souls. I actually don't want to take out too many Ether Vials in this matchup. It is an attrition-based matchup. We have to go down on mana sources, but I don't want to take out too many Ether Vials because they are a Blood Moon deck. They can bring in Blood Moon and really put a hurt on us. And for that reason, this is one of the matchups where I take out Kumena Speaker instead of Benthic Biomancer, because if Blood Moon resolves, I can still cast Benthic Biomancer off of islands, but I have no mana that will cast this Kumena Speaker unless I have Ether Vial. So Kumena Speaker is, in general, against Blood Moon decks, you want to sort of shave on your green stuff because that's the liability if a Blood Moon resolves. Okay, against Merfolk, It's another Ether Vial matchup on the play. Bring in 2 Collector Oof, take out 2 Force of Negation. Very similar plan against humans. If you don't have an Ether Vial, your opponent does have an Ether Vial on the draw, you play Collector Oof, and that hurts them so much. You get so far ahead in the game. And then also you take out 2 Force Negation, not very important. But on the draw, we're going to have all the Force Negations because it's really important to counter your opponent's Ether Vial on the play. Not to mention, you can still hit things like Echoing Truth, Dismember, Vapor Snag. What else is pretty hot right now? Cards like that. Against Goblins, on the play, you're going to want to bring in Spreading Seas. And you still need to... I feel like they can play through Spreading Seas pretty well, but Spreading Seas, it still is a way of getting Island Walk and attacking with unblockable creatures. And again, they're an Ether Vial deck. We bring in the Collector Oof, take out 4 Force Negation. They don't really have a whole lot of things to counter on the play. And on the draw, I'll have some Force Negation because, again, I want to counter their Ether Vial and bring in the Spreading Seas. And we don't have Oof on the draw because we want our Ether Vial to work. Okay, against Martyr Control, we bring in a Deprive and 4 Chalice of the Void, put it on 1. The deck is just loaded on 1-drops. Bring in 4 Spreading Seas for Island Walk. Not to mention, I think there's some cards. I think there's some lands that you want to Spreading Seas as well in that matchup. You take out the Tidebinder Mages because there's no synergy against them. You can bring out 1 Cavern of Souls. They're a Path to Exile deck, so you can assume that something will get Path to Exile, and you're going to get more lands. And you can take out 4 Benthic Biomancer because it's a liability with Chalice on 1. Against Bogles, this should be a very good matchup because of Chalice of the Void. We bring in 1 Deprive, counter Daybreak Coronet, basically. And we bring in Chalice of the Void to put on 1. So if you're on the play, Chalice on 1 basically wins the game on the spot. On the draw, maybe not necessarily because they can... Their turn 2 is probably going to be playing 2 auras at 1 mana, but it's still a very strong play. You also bring in 2 Spreading Seas because you can mana screw them. There's a lot of situations where they don't have much mana in play, and Spreading Seas is one of their white sources. Or maybe their only white source makes it really hard or really far from them to casting Daybreak Coronet. We take out 4 Benthic Biomancers, 2 Tidebinder Mages, 1 Harbinger. These creatures are not... The most important thing against Bogles is just having Lords. Lord them out! Lord them out. Against Blue Eye Control, we bring in 1 Deprive, 4 Chalice of the Void. Maybe I should change this. I'm going to change this. We're going to go 3 Chalice of the Void. Because this is what I've been doing. I don't really feel like taking out any of the lands because I'm sacrificing them pretty often. We have 4 Horizon lands that I just sacrifice. So this is... And I don't really feel like overloading on Chalice of the Void. So this is what I've been doing in this matchup. It's one small adjustment. I hope I remember to do that for the actual thing on Patreon. So yeah, we bring in 1 Deprive. It's a counterspell, counters anything. 3 Chalice of the Void. So I mostly play Chalice on 1, and it's enough to... It's awkward for them. You hurt their Opt, their Serum Visions, and their Path to Exiles, and their Snapcaster Mage into any of those particular cards, so they lose a lot of value out of Snapcaster Mage. But it's not out of the question to put a Chalice on 3. I mean, the games can go late, and after a few Path to Exiles, you end up having like 6 mana in play. Play a Chalice on 3. Counters Detention Sphere, counters Narset, counters Teferi Time Raveler, counters Timely Reinforcements, counters... What else am I missing here? I feel like I'm missing one more thing. Like, a Chalice on 3 is a big deal. Also, if you have the mana, play a Chalice on 4. Doesn't hurt you. Counters Jace the Mind Sculptor, Cryptic Command. So these are some things that you could do with Chalice of the Void. It's not restricted to playing Chalice on 1. I would say don't play Chalice on 2. I don't think they have enough things to counter on 2, and it just would mostly screw you anyway. So Chalice of the Void can be played on 1. It can also be played on 3 and 4. And it can happen. It can happen. So you take out Spreading Seas. Not that pretty. Like, sometimes you get them. You slow down their white mana, but I don't think it's that important. And I take out 2 Tidebinder Mages because it's just a Grizzly Bear. So against Tron, I actually think this is a very good... You may not have the greatest game 1 against Tron, but you have an amazing games 2 and 3 against Tron. So I bring in 4 Collector Oofs. That ruins their older mana rocks, like Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star, screws over Expedition Map. You know, your Expedition Map is ruined. Hurts Oblivion Stone, hurts Walking Ballista. It's a real baiting. Collector Oof is just incredibly strong. So yeah, I really like Collector Oof in this matchup. And then we've got 1 Deprive. It's just a counterspell, counter Ugin, counter Wormcoil, whatever you need. Spreading Seas, of course, because of the Tron lands, so keep them off of Tron. And Chalice of the Void, not too many of them because we're already bringing in a lot of cards. So Chalice of the Void to put on 1. That will counter Nature's Claim, Expedition Map, Chromatic Sphere, Chromatic Star. I feel like I'm missing something, but that might be it. We're bringing in the Oofs, so we're taking out some Vials. Tidebinder Mage, not important. Harbinger, not important. Benthic Biomancer, not important enough. It's a good card in the matchup, but everything else is more important. Against Wur Prison, the new version with Urza and Goblin Engineer. We're bringing in Deprive to counter any particular important spell. Most importantly, things like Thopter Foundry, Urza, Ensnaring Bridge, maybe Goblin Engineer because it can find Ensnaring Bridge. We're bringing in Collector Oof because their deck just gets shut down. They won't do anything. I mean, it doesn't help protect you against Ensnaring Bridge, but it will significantly slow them down. Keep in mind that they can still play Whir of Invention and tap artifacts even if you have a Collector Oof in play, so yeah, I won't stop that. And then Chalice of the Void, you can put it on 1. I like putting it on 1 because it hits the Astral Blade, hits Fatal Push, hits Galvanic Blast, hits Pyretic Spellbomb, I think it is. So I really want to protect my Oof, basically. You play the Chalice on 1, then you play your Oof, and then hopefully that wins the game from there. There is some room on the play to play it on 0. It hits their Mishra's Baubles and their Mox Opals, but like it's only 8 cards in their deck. They have more 1-drops than they have 0-drops, and you still have the problem of protecting your Collector Oof. So we're taking out 2 Spreading Seasons, it's just not necessary. They've got islands. 2 Harbinger of the Tides, nothing to bounce. A Benthic Biomancer and 2 Aether Vial because we are bringing in the 4 Oofs. Now there's the classic Wur Prison deck, which basically is played by nobody except, I think, the original Wur Prison player. I think his name is Thesaurus. But we bring in 1 Deprive to counter Ensnaring Bridge or anything that can find an Ensnaring Bridge. 4 Collector Oof. 3 Chalice of the Void, but you put it on 0 because this deck plays with all the 0-mana artifacts. You bring in... you take out the Spreading Seasons. We've got Island Walk already. Tidebinder's just a Grizzly Bear. Harbinger's just a Grizzly Bear. And 2 Aether Vial because we're bringing in the Collector Oofs. Okay, Mono Red Prison. So this is like a Blood Moon Chalice of the Void deck. You bring in the Spreading Seas to Spreading Seas your own lands after your opponent has played Blood Moon. So if you have a non-basic land and your opponent plays Blood Moon, all non-basics turn into mountains, but Spreading Seas says that target land becomes an island. So there is a timestamp rule which says that the most recent effect takes precedent. So if your opponent plays Blood Moon first, your breeding pool becomes a mountain, but then if you Spreading Seas the breeding pool again, it becomes an island. It becomes a non-basic island. So that is one way you can get out of getting mana screwed. I mean, you are going to have an island in play in order to do this, but it's still something. In addition to that, if your opponent plays Blood Moon again, so they play Blood Moon, turn your non-basics into mountains. You play Spreading Seas, turn the mountain into an island. If they play a Blood Moon after that, then that your non-basic island becomes a non-basic mountain again. Deprived to hit like Anger the Gods, Karn, any big planeswalker. Some mono-red prison decks have different configurations, but you can count on 1 big bomb being played in that deck, and you want to bring in a counterspell to counter it. And 3 Commander Speakers because it is a Blood Moon deck, and you want to reduce the number of green creatures you have. Okay, against Blue-Black Fairies, we want to bring in a Deprive, just a counterspell to hit Snapcaster Mage, Damnation, stuff like that. It's a control deck, basically. And I'll bring in 2 Spreading Seasons to actually hit Creeping Tar Pit or Mutavault, which is annoying. They have a lot of man lands in their deck. Taking out a Breeding Pool because it is a control matchup. Taking out 2 Tidebinder Mages because Tidebinder Mage isn't going to do shit in this matchup. So we've got Dredge. So against Dredge, bring in all 4 Grafdigger's Cages and take out the 4 Benthic Biomancers. And I have a note here that maybe you can bring in 2 Seas, take out 2 Trickster. Oops. What happened here? So maybe bring in 2 Seas, take out 2 Trickster. There are some situations where the board gets clogged up, you really need Island Walk, and Trickster is not that great in this matchup at all. But I'm just going to leave it with maximum creatures. Against Hogak, it's a very simple, bring in 4 Grafdigger's Cage, take out 4 Force of Negation. They've got Faithless Looting, but I don't think that's worth keeping Force of Negation in for. And they will be bringing in things like Fatal Push and stuff like that, but they're going to play it on our... If they play it on our turn, then we don't get any value out of Force of Negation. So I'm not pleased with this card. I think it's worth taking out. I found that it was just way more often just sitting dead in my hand than doing anything at all. Against Infect, this should be a very good matchup. Bring in Spreading Seas to hit the Inkmoth Nexus. Occasionally, if they have very little green mana on the board, you could Spreading Seas their like 1 green mana source. Chalice of the Void, play on 1. If that wasn't obvious, Chalice of the Void on 1 against Infect just shuts them down completely. The deck is almost all 1 mana spells. Take out 4 Benthic Biomancer and 2 Mara Reejerey. So the Reejerey is just clunky, the Biomancer is just getting in the way of the Chalice on 1. So against Titan Shift, bring in Deprive because it can counter Primeval Titan and the Scape Shift, and Anger the Gods if necessary. Bring in 2 Chalice of the Voids. Play it on 0 because that counters Summoner's Pact. So a decent chunk of their ways of winning the game would be to play Summoner's Pact to find Primeval Titan to play it, but if you have a Chalice on 0, that will prevent it completely. Then you can play, take out 2 Harbinger of the Tides, not very good. Tidebinder Mage is fine though, because after they play Primeval Titan, you play the Tidebinder Mage, and you tap that damn thing down, and then you don't have to worry about it. And you can take out a Benthic Biomancer. So Counters Company, we bring in 1 Deprive. I just like bringing in a Deprive because I think after a few turns, they're threatening to win the game over and over again, so you at least want to counterspell something. And I think it's a little bit more effective to counter the threats than to try to kill them on the board, because the Counters Company is now playing with Giver of Runes, which protects their combo with Vizier of Remedies and Devoted Druid. So countering a Vizier of Remedies, I think is more effective than trying to kill the Vizier of Remedies, because it's just going to get protected by the Giver of Runes. So that's why we're bringing the Deprive for Spreading Seas, just to attack through a bunch of creatures. If the board gets clogged up, some versions of Counters Company will play Kitchen Finks, for example. It's a decent blocker. Bring in 4 Grafdigger's Cage to prevent any of the spells that tutor, and any of the spells that are like Collected Company that put creatures into play from the library. We're going to take out 2 Harbinger of the Tides because I think it's just situational. I think it's very hard to, and I don't think you have any luck targeting any of their creatures anyway. Take out 4 Benthic Biomancer. I just think it's the weakest card in the deck, and take out 1 island. They are a Path to Exile deck, so they'll help us find more lands. Against Amulet Titan, we're going to bring in... Hold on, is that the full thing here? No. Okay. So against Amulet Titan, we're going to bring in 4 Collector Oof, because the main ways we lose the game is they're going to play a Primeval Titan, and they're going to find Teleria West, and they're going to use Teleria West to transmute to find either Engineered Explosives or Walking Ballista. And Collector Oof beats both those cards. So if you just put a Collector Oof in play, you prevent them from finding the cards that beat us. Usually we can Goldfish and beat a Primeval Titan. That's not a big deal. But what we can't do is beat those hate cards that they find after the Primeval Titan has searched for them. So we can't beat a Walking Ballista and we can't beat Engineered Explosives. But if we play the Collector Oof, then those cards are no longer a problem. And even if a Primeval Titan hits the battlefield, its best chance is only to find more Primeval Titans. Bring in Chalice of the Void because it might be worth bringing in 3 or 4. I don't know. The point is to mainly play it on 0. And if you play it on 0, you prevent your opponent from finding Summoner's Pact. It cuts off Summoner's Pact, which finds Primeval Titan, but it also cuts off Teleria West, which could be transmuted to find Summoner's Pact. So you shut off even more cards on the battlefield. Situationally, you could play it on 1 if your opponent doesn't have an Amulet out already. And you bring in a Deprive to potentially counter Primeval Titan, but even if not that, then you can counter Summoner's Pact or creatures that are not being played off of a Cavern of Souls, like Walking Ballista or Tireless Tracker. Harbinger rarely bounces anything, and you don't even really want to bounce anything in this matchup. Take out 3 Benthic Biomancer, I think it's one of the weaker cards in the matchup, and take out 2 Aether Vial because we're bringing in the Oofs. Oof! Oof, oof, oof. Alright, Storm. I was a little torn about bringing in Chalice against Storm. They're pretty prepared for Chalice right now, and they've got a lot of 2-mana, 3-mana spells in their sideboard, like Pieces of the Puzzle and Wipe Away and Echoing Truth, Hurkyl's Recall. So they've got a lot of... They're prepared. They're prepared for a Chalice on 1. So I don't really want to fight them in that regard. And their deck is so heavy on 2-drops now that like Chalice on 1 just doesn't look very appealing. So I want to fight them with Grafdigger's Cage, prevent them from casting Past in Flames in the graveyard, prevent them from flashing back anything in the graveyard, and deprive, counter, Gifts Ungiven, counter Pieces of the Puzzle, that's card advantage. We're going to take out 2 Spreading Seasons because they already have islands. Harbinger doesn't have anything to bounce. And Tidebinder Mage is just like not that great. You can tap down a Goblin Electromancer, but it's not great. Anyway, these are not important cards. I'd just rather have a very low lean curve of 1-drops and then go 2-drop Lord, 3-drop Lord, and beat them. Okay, Elves. We should have a pretty decent matchup against them because we're bringing in 4 Grafdigger's Cage. So screw their tutors and their collected companies. Bring in Spreading Seas because they will have a board that gets clogged. The battlefield can get clogged with creatures and we need a way to break through. Now we're taking out Harbinger of the Tides because bouncing all the stuff is very hard and not very relevant. And the 4 Benthic Biomancers just as a replacement for Grafdigger's Cage. I'd rather keep all the Lords and other interactive creatures. Now against Neoform, it's a bye, basically. You can't lose this matchup if you at least mulligan a little aggressively. So, in addition to having 4 Force of Negation in the main deck, we've got 4 Grafdigger's Cage, which just says that you can't win the game either, unless you beat this card. Got a Deprive for their Eldritch Evolution or Neoform. 4 Chalice of the Voids, play it on 0, hurts their Summoner's Pacts to find Allosaurus Rex. I think that's the name of the card. And then we're just taking out a bunch of irrelevant stuff. 2 Spreading Seas, 2 Mara Reejery because it's clunky, 2 Tidebinder Mage that can't tap down anything, Harbinger of the Tides which will not bounce anything, and a Benthic Biomancer. Okay, Ad Nauseam. You bring in Deprive. It's a counterspell. You can counter Ad Nauseam, counter basically anything you think relevant in the matchup. Bring in Collector Oof because that counters their Mana Rocks and... what's it called? Lotus Bloom. That helps a lot, because their mana is very important for comboing off. And Chalice of the Void. Play on 1. Sometime situationally 0. And so yeah, playing it on 1 will hit Angel's Grace. Serum Visions, their cantrips, some Fatal Pushes that they'll bring in from the sideboard. I say situationally 0 because if they've got a bunch of Lotus Blooms that are about to come off suspend, you can put on 0 to stop those. Not only that, it also prevents for Pact of Negation, which is a 0 mana spell that they have, so Chalice of the Void will counter that as well. Because we're bringing oofs, again, we're taking out 2 Aether Vials, take out 2 Seas, not relevant, 2 Tidebinder Mage, not relevant, Harbinger, not relevant, Mirror Regery, just a bit clunky. Against Mill, we don't have much to do here. Bring in a Deprive to counter maybe an Ensnaring Bridge and take out a Spreading Seas. Against Living End, you bring in Deprive to counter the Living End. Bring 4 Chalice of the Void to put on 0. They're going to have a lot of answers to this, but, you know, whatever. C'est la vie. If they don't have an answer, then Chalice buys you a lot of time, or just wins the game on the spot. Take out 2 Rajiri because it's clunky. Take out 2 Harbinger of the Tides because you don't want to bounce any of these cycling creatures, and take out a Benthic Biomancer. Keep in mind I keep 2 Spreading Seizes in the deck because randomly there are games where a Living End resolves and both sides have a bunch of creatures, but the only way you can attack through is if you have a Spreading Seize. So we have Cheerios, also known as the Pure Steel Paladin deck. Bring in a Deprive against them to counter, hopefully, Pure Steel Paladin or SRAM. Bring in Chalice the Void, play it on 0 so all the artifacts get countered. Every artifact that they play that would normally draw a card, it gets countered, goes to the graveyard, and they can't recycle these artifacts later. Take out 2 Spreading Seizes, it's not important, they have islands. Take out Harbinger, not important. Tidebinder Mage, not important. Goryo's Vengeance, the black-red version. Bring in a Deprive, counters their Goryo's Vengeance or Through the Breach. Bring in Grafdigger's Cage, prevents creatures from the graveyard entering the battlefield. Take out 2 Spreading Seas, not important. They either have nothing in play or you're dead. And Harbinger of the Tides, take it out. You're not going to bounce anything. There's nothing to bounce. And 2 Tidebinder Mages. Okay, looks like that's it. Alright, so that is the decklist and sideboard guide. I hope you learned something. Hopefully you got some insight into why I'm playing the cards that I am, so that you can better make the sideboard decisions for yourself in the future. This has been Nikachu with my decklist, Simic Merfolk decklist and sideboard guide of August 2019.